Thank you. It seems to be established custom that we may remain behind the table, so I shall do that as well. Yes, the reason I'm sitting here is because last year I was writing an article, and when writing, which had nothing to do with the subject, and when writing that, I came upon 4 decisions by a long defunct German court using customary international law to solve disputes between German states. I went to Panos, who was still sitting at the same floor as I was, and I said, "Look, Panos, isn't this interesting?" And he said, "Yes, this is very interesting." And a couple of weeks later, he asked me to speak at this conference. So that's what you get from bringing things to colleagues. I somewhat feel like a sole retriever of an ancient prudence here, to quote Thomas Hobbes, because I'm not an international lawyer, I'm a constitutional lawyer, and I'm usually not dealing with customary international law at all. So please bear with me, be gentle with me, be kind to me, it's still early. To start my presentation, I'm going to quote in German, but I will translate it somewhat for you from the closing sentences that Hans Kelsen wrote in 1928 in his presentation that he gave together with Heinrich Triepel, which is interesting from an international law perspective, on the yearly convention of the German Association for Constitutional Lawyers. And in 1928, they were convening in Vienna, which was convenient for Kelsen, on the subject of constitutional review. And Kelsen gave a long presentation on the benefits of a constitutional court, taking, of course, example from the Austrian Constitution. But he ended his presentation with the following. Hans Kelsen: Die Aufgaben, die sich einem Verfassungsgericht im Rahmen eines Bundesstaates bieten, lassen besonders deutlich die Verwandtschaft hervortreten, die zwischen der Verfassungsgerichtsbarkeit und einer zwischenstaatlichen, der Wahrung des Völkerrechts dienenden Gerichtsbarkeit, schon mit Rücksicht auf die gegenseitige Nähe der Rechtsstufen, besteht, um deren Garantien es sich handelt. Und so, wie die eine den Krieg zwischen den Völkern überflüssig machen will, bewährt sich die andere in ihrem letzten Sinne innerhalb des Einzelstaates als eine Garantie des politischen Friedens. Now, what Kelsen claims here is that there is a parallel between what a constitutional court can do and what international courts should do, namely to make sure that peace is guaranteed on the international level by guaranteeing peace between sovereign states, and within a state by guaranteeing through discerning conflicts that the peace within the domestic legal order is maintained. My presentation will show some examples of constitutional courts that indeed do that. And I will start by, well, the examples that I stumbled upon and that I gave to Panos, namely the case law of the German Staatsgerichtshof für das Deutsche Reich. Well, that's a defunct court. It was introduced by the Weimar Constitution in 1919, and it was the first example in Germany of a, let's say, a form of constitutional jurisdiction and constitutional review in Statum nascendi. The Staatsgerichtshof für das Deutsche Reich was sort of an ad hoc court which was formed alongside the German Reichsgericht, which was the highest German court in civil and criminal cases. And the Staatsgerichtshof had a few tasks under the 1919 Constitution that all dealt with, let's say, federal disputes. It was entitled to solve constitutional disputes within a German state if this German state did not have its own constitutional court, and most of the German states back then did not have a constitutional court, and therefore the Staatsgerichtshof had to act often to solve constitutional disputes within a state. But it was also entitled to solve public law disputes between the German Reich and one or more states, and to solve public law disputes between several German states. And especially in that latter aspect, the court had to solve a few disputes that arose in the 1920s between German states. And in solving these disputes, the court used customary international law. At least it used what itself described as customary international law. Now, that had to do with the fact that Article 4 of the Weimar Constitution, and that was a new provision then in the German constitutional law system, Article 4 of the German Constitution of 1919 stipulated that the generally acknowledged norms of international law form part of the federal German law. It has a successor in Article 25 of the Grundgesetz. I will come to that a bit later. But this was the first time that in the German legal order, international legal norms were introduced as part of the domestic legal order with the level of federal laws. They took precedence over all the state law, and they also took precedence over interstate treaties. These generally accepted norms of international law were not just customary international legal norms, but mostly so. And in the German doctrine of the antebellum, it was generally seen that Germany at least should accept these norms as binding. And if Germany did that, they were valid before all the German courts, so also before the Staatsgerichtshof. It's very hard to translate Staatsgerichtshof. It's not exactly a constitutional court, but it's something like that. 4 major decisions were given in the 1920s, and I think they all show that Cedric was right when he said that domestic courts really interpret domestic law. They use customary international laws to help them doing that. 4 cases are of interest still also for the present-day German constitutional system. The first was a decision on a dispute between Bremen and Prussia, in which Bremen claimed that a 1904 treaty between Bremen and Prussia on the harbor of Bremerhaven was in fact an unequal treaty, because Prussia was so much more powerful within the German system before 1918. The emperor was also the king of Prussia. Bremen claimed this was an unequal treaty. We were sort of forced into this by giving up our sovereign rights on the harbor of Bremerhaven, and we want it back. We want to get out of this treaty. The second decision was a dispute between the state of Baden on the one hand and Prussia and Württemberg on the other hand on the use of the waters of the river Danube, which was a border river between Baden and Württemberg, which are now one state, but which back then were 2 different states. And also in the north on Prussia. Basically all German states border Prussia one way or the other, because Prussia was 3/5 of the entire territory of Germany. And this was a dispute on the use of the waters of the Danube. Baden claimed that Württemberg and Prussia illegally put waterworks in the Danube, which hindered the use of the river by Baden, and that was not good neighborliness, claimed Baden. The third decision was again Bremen, the smallest German state, but still very feisty. The Bremens claimed, or the Bremen government claimed, that it could no longer take in waters from the river Weser for drinking water purposes, because Brunswick, Prussia, and Thuringia allowed the river Weser to be heavily populated by potassium mines, and they did do nothing about it. And Bremen claimed this is not as those German states are supposed to act towards us. The final decision was on a dispute between the then still autonomous city of Lübeck and the state of Mecklenburg-Strelitz on fishing rights in the Lübecker Bucht, which is a part of the Baltic Sea. And Lübeck claimed that Mecklenburg-Strelitz had made laws which infringed upon the classic rights that Lübecker fishermen had in the Lübecker Bucht. Now, in all these cases, we're dealing with territorial sovereignty on your own territory, and what you could describe as a good neighborliness principle or so. It's not completely clear when the Staatsgerichtshof uses what itself describes as customary international law through Article 4 of the Constitution, what norms exactly they are referring to. But it seems in all these 4 cases, it seems to be something like a principle of good neighborliness. And the court says, look, when this principle holds between sovereign states, that is even far more the case within the legal order of Germany, that binds the German states together in a far closer union than any international law compact could ever do. So they are supposed to behave to one another in a system of good neighborliness. And if that holds true in international law, it holds even more true within the domestic German legal order. And since there is no principle as such within German law asserting this, and there cannot be a Verfassungslücke, there cannot be a constitutional gap, because Germany is a Rechtsstaat, so there must be a norm, and therefore the norms of international customary law regulating the behavior of states to one another should be used within the domestic legal order of Germany as well. After the Second World War, under the new Basic Law of 1949, of course, the Bundesverfassungsgericht, the Federal Constitutional Court, was introduced, and it has far-reaching, broad powers under the Constitution to make sure that nothing bad ever happens again in Germany. But all the powers that the Staatsgerichtshof used to have now belong to the Bundesverfassungsgericht, to the Federal Constitutional Court. So it also has to deal with disputes between German states. And whereas the Staatsgerichtshof was pretty clear that customary international law, at least what the Staatsgerichtshof itself described as customary international law, could be used to regulate disputes between German states, the Bundesverfassungsgericht is far more hesitant, far hazier in its approach. One of the very first cases that the Bundesverfassungsgericht had to decide at all was it's still quite a classic case in Germany, because it was, I think it was the second or third decision that they gave in 1951, is the Südweststaat decision. That had to do with the union of Baden, there we have it again, Württemberg and Württemberg-Hohenzollern into one state, Baden-Württemberg. And although the German Constitution, the Basic Law, makes it possible for German states to enter into unions with each other through procedure, there was a specific procedure for these three southern states for a more speedy union, because everybody agreed basically that these three states that were created by the French were too small to survive independently. And so these three were to be joined together through a referendum, and a federal act was created to make this possible based upon this specific article in the Basic Law. But here comes the government of Baden, claiming before the court that Article 25 of the Basic Law, which is the successor to Article 4, Article 25 says that the generally accepted norms of international law form part of the domestic German legal order, and they take precedence over the laws, which is new. It wasn't there in 1919, but it was there in 1949. And the government of Baden says, look, based upon Article 25 of the Grundgesetz, of the Basic Law, the principle of self-determination of peoples forms part of the domestic legal order. Therefore, the population of Baden cannot be forced into a union with Württemberg and Württemberg-Hohenzollern through a referendum in which a majority of the votes in these three states together shall count. No. The government, the people of Baden themselves should accept this by a majority of votes. And then the Bundesverfassungsgericht says, that's a very nice idea, but no, that doesn't cut it, because there is perhaps room for the use of customary international law in relationship between the German states, but not in the relationship between the German states and the federal government. And since this is a federal act, it cannot hold true. That relationship is completely guided by the German legal order itself, which is at least meant to be as a complete legal order without Verfassungslücken. And in 1973, in the Kobusch decision, the Bundesverfassungsgericht went even further, and they said even within intra-state relations between German states, there cannot be any room for international law or customary international law included. And the clausula rebus sic santibus, which was the deciding principle in that case, was therefore interpreted by the court not as a rule of customary international law, but as a rule of unwritten German law. It formed part of the Bundestreue, the federal loyalty that German states should ascertain to each other. So far so good, you would say. 30 January 1973, the case is decided, there is no room for customary international law within Germany, but no, that summer, 31 July 1973, which is still one of the most famous cases that Karlsruhe has given, the Grundlagenvertrag decision on the treaty between the German Federal Republic and the German Democratic Republic of the German Democratic Republic of GDR on their internal relationships, which was a very complicated treaty because on the one hand, the Federal Republic acknowledged the existence of the German Democratic Republic, But on the other hand, the treaty denied that the German Democratic Republic was a foreign country. So, in a sense, this was an interstate German relationship, at least from the perspective of the FRG. In this decision, the court said, yes, there might be room for the use of customary international law in intra-state German relations, and they specifically pointed to the pre-war case law of the Staatsgerichtshof for the Deutsche Reich to prove this. And since then there have been, as far as I know, no new cases. So it's sort of puzzling whether the German Federal Constitutional Court still acknowledges the use of customary international law for relationships between German states. It might have become defunct since the GDR no longer exists, but I'm not sure. How much time do I have, Mr. Chairman? My time is up. Okay. Yeah, sure. So then I would have some remarks on Austria as well, but we have an Austrian in the room, so I'm happy to remain silent. So I will leave it at that. Thank you. Thank you so much.